with this. Will IBF junior middleweight champion Marie-Eve Caire to defend her super welterweight championship on November 23rd against Ogledi Suarez. Hannah Gabriels to defend her WBA junior middleweight crown. And this is news, folks. This is big news. Not necessarily because of these two separate title defenses, so much as they're going to be featured on the same card as a joint effort to build up what will be a unification fight between Marie-Eve Caire and Hannah Gabriels. Lou DiBella, Yvonne Michelle, they are orchestrating the situation that will see both the champions squaring off against each other, provided that they come out successful in these upcoming title defenses. Now, this is more or less what I told you guys back when news broke that Hannah Gabriels had inked a deal with Lou DiBella, that opens doors for Hannah Gabriels, who flew largely under the radar for a time, even though she's an excellent fighter. But she was flying far under the radar. You know, nobody knew who she was up until she had that fight with Clarissa Shields. And I talked about, thereafter, in the months following that fight, when news broke that she had inked a pact with Lou DiBella, that opens doors for bigger situations, for bigger fights, because the American public, while she was largely unknown to the American public, once they laid eyes on her, once they saw what she could do and her aesthetic as a fighter and as a woman, I knew they were going to like what they saw. And that's what's going on here, okay? That's what's going on here. She's with Lou DiBella, and the big situations I described, they are underway. The wheels are in motion. And now all that remains is for the defending champions to remain champions long enough that they can square off against each other. The question now is, can they do that? Well, Hannah Gabriel's opponent has yet to be announced. Though I doubt they're going to put her in there with a killer. I doubt that they're going to put her in there with someone a bit too interesting an opponent option that could threaten the unification fight. I imagine that whoever Hannah Gabriels is going to be fighting on this card, it's going to be a bit of a gimme fight, a bit of a showcase fight to build up the unification match with Marie-Eve Caire. We don't know who she's fighting.
We don't.
It hasn't been announced yet, but I don't imagine it's going to be a killer. In the case of Marie-Eve Caire, the IBF champion, we do have some insight into her opponent, Ogledi Suarez of Venezuela. And, you can see that Ogledi's, for what it's worth, she's got a heck of a lot more pro fights than Marie-Eve Caire, but don't let that fool you. Don't kid yourself. There's more to the story. There's more to it than meets the eye. I'll say that Ogledi Suarez, she's very easy on the eyes. She's a very attractive fighter.
Yeah.
And she's got this pro record, looks very accomplished.
Yeah, looks.
But when you start to scratch the surface and get a little deeper into it, you dig a little deeper to see just, what this fighter's made of, what she done so far, you'll notice that her quality of competition is largely pedestrian. These girls that she's been fighting, a lot of them, they're just, they're no-hopers. She took a professional loss to Lucas Mathise's little sister, Edith Mathise, and that's the most interesting opponent that Ogledi has fought. You'd think that with that amount of professional bouts, she would have, stepped up in competition at some point. But it seems that, she's been fighting these girls, these no-hopers that, they're all more or less from the same cookie cutter. That being said, in the few pro fights that Marie-Eve Caire has had so far, she's already fought someone far more interesting than anyone Ogledi has fought. Marie-Eve Caire, lest we forget, she didn't, win some vacant title. She unseated the actual reigning champion at the weight, the IBF champion, Chris Namas. Okay, that's how she got her belt. It wasn't some belt of opportunity, some belt that was just, lying around or something. No, she unseated a reigning champion, and she only had a few pro fights. So Marie-Eve Caire has established herself not only as a very polished boxer and one of the elites at the weight, but she's the real deal because she took on a real fighter, a real champion, in the process of becoming a champion herself. That establishes her, that legitimizes her, where Ogledi's, yeah, you got a lot of pro fights, but, against who? I think at minimum, it's safe to say that in spite of having less pro fights, Marie-Eve Caire has faced a better quality of competition than Ogledi Suarez. And we're going to have to look, we're going to have a better look at Ogledi Suarez to see, just what she's capable of. We'll get into a full fight breakdown as the fight date approaches, but at minimum, that's the impression that I'm getting, that in spite of Marie-Eve Caire being the greener professional in the bout, oddly enough, also being the defending champion, at the end of the day, In spite of her having more pro fights, she has faced a better quality of competition, and you know what? That does speak volumes in a fight and determining its outcome. So for now, keep your eyes peeled for this card. On November 23rd, Marie-Eve Dicker will be defending her IBF junior middleweight title against Oglady Suarez, and Hannah Gabriels will be defending her WBA title against an opponent that has yet to be announced. And if both these world champions are successful in their title defenses, ladies and gentlemen, things are going to get very serious. What could be the most important fight in the women's junior middleweight division, the most important fight involving two world champions, that fight, that unification, is well on its way. In other news, in regards to this weekend's big middleweight matchup between Gennady Golovkin, the former unified middleweight champion Gennady Golovkin, and Sergey Derevyancheko, these two guys, they're fighting for the red belt, the vacant red belt that used to belong to Canelo Alvarez. A very interesting insight into, their negotiations and what were the negotiations for Canelo. Keith Connolly, Sergey Derevyanchenko's manager, he's saying that with this Golovkin fight, they actually stand to net more money than they would have made had they taken Canelo up on his offer. And that's a very revealing that's a very revealing perspective, because that is a perspective that begs a question. What exactly did Canelo's people, what exactly did Golden Boy offer Sergey Derevyanchenko
for the fight?
What was the dollar amount? I mean, Keith Connolly, he didn't mention how much money they offered him. He didn't get into a figure, right? But he is saying that they stand to net more money with Golovkin. So you got to wonder, what did they offer Sergey? What did Golden Boy offer Sergey for the fight? And why is it that Golovkin, he actually stands more to make with him than he would have with Canelo, when, Canelo's the cash cow. Canelo's the money guy. That's the money fight. Yet here you are, and you get more money from a Golovkin match. What's going on? I think at minimum, what it communicates, because, at the end of the day, like it or not, Canelo Alvarez is the money guy, more so than Gennady Golovkin, more so than many other boxers in many other weight classes. That can't be denied, that Canelo Alvarez is the financial incentive for anyone at or around the middleweight division. It's not going to change. But if he is all these things, why didn't they put up, a dollar amount that was more to Sergey's liking? Why did it get to the point to where the IBF is stripping you of your belt? And that's just it.
What?
If you want my opinion, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, if Sergey's making more money in a Golovkin fight than he would have made in a Canelo fight, it's because that belt, it didn't mean anything to Canelo. It didn't mean anything to Golden Boy, because if it did, they would have done what they had to do to make sure that Canelo kept it. See what I'm saying? Canelo is the money fight. He is the financial incentive for many fighters in many weight classes. So he's got plenty of dough to throw around. And yet, here we see that a fighter that he was supposed to fight in defense of what was his belt, that fighter stands to make more money fighting someone else for that same belt. So at minimum, what it communicates is that to Canelo Alvarez, or maybe not even Canelo, maybe it was just the guys at Golden Boy, they really weren't interested in making sure that Canelo held on to that belt, because if they were, well, they would have offered Sergey a little bit more money to make sure that the fight gets made, the belt gets kept, and it gets defended, if it mattered to them. But it must not have, because here we see that Sergey stands to make more bread with another guy who's not even really in possession of that belt. And this lends credence to a notion that I expressed when this fiasco had first kicked off between Canelo, Sergey Derevyanchenko, and the IBF, that, I just felt like Golden Boy didn't do what they had to do. That if Canelo Alvarez ended up getting stripped of the red belt, it's really because Golden Boy didn't give enough of a damn to make sure that doesn't happen. Canelo actually had the luxury of filing for an exemption to the mandatory, so that time constraint, that deadline, wouldn't have even been in play. But they didn't do that. They didn't file the paperwork. They didn't file for an exemption. They were being indecisive with who their next opponent was going to be. And while all of this is happening, what's not happening is you guys doing what you got to do to make sure he keeps that belt. I didn't think they cared about keeping that belt. And what this portion of the story, what this insight characterizes, is just that if you really cared about that belt, you would have offered Sergey something a little better, because here today, as it turns out, he's making more money fighting Golovkin. Well, how's that? Golovkin's not the cash cow of the middleweight division. Golovkin's not the cash cow in the sport of boxing. So how is it that Sergey's making more money with him than he would have made with you? And it's because with you guys didn't really care about keeping that red belt. You weren't really serious. You were pussyfooting around, being prima donnas, being princesses, and being indecisive. And as a result of that, you got stripped. Now, I don't think that Oscar, Canelo, Eric Gomez, I don't think any of these guys are really losing all that much sleep over it. But this does accentuate what I was talking about before. That, if Sergey and Keith Connolly, if these guys ended up making more money with Golovkin than they would have made with Canelo, it's because, I don't know, maybe to Golovkin's people fighting for a world title, it's worth more to them than it was for Canelo. At least, for Canelo to keep his belt, because it was already his belt. He just, him or a Golden Boy or somebody, they let it slip through the cracks. It's a very interesting situation this weekend between these two guys, because Sergey Derevyancheko, solid middleweight, solid fighter, very aggressive guy, very crafty guy. In turn, Gennady Golovkin, we know what he's known for. We know that he's already made a name for himself. But at the end of the day, the Golovkin that we knew may not be the Golovkin that we see on Saturday night, because this is not Golovkin and Abel Sanchez going in there, He's with Jonathan Banks. He's in an experimental phase with a brand new trainer, and they're only one fight in to their partnership. So we don't know what kind of synergy is or isn't happening, and we're not really going to know until the night of the fight. It's a very curious situation, because if you felt with an absolute certitude that the situation was now the way it was before, to where you got Golovkin and he's with Abel Sanchez and they're doing a thing at Big Bear, if it was that situation, I would say that I'd feel more confident that Golovkin wins in dominant fashion. But the fact of the matter is, he's an aging fighter who's experimenting with a new trainer, and they are working on things differently than, what Golovkin had going on with Abel Sanchez. So I don't really know what kind of Golovkin I'm going to get. That's actually very intriguing. That may actually result in a more competitive fight than it would have been had this been the Golovkin of old. Very interesting situation. We'll get into a full fight breakdown tomorrow, or later today, depending on when I upload this video. We're going to get into that. But it is curious because, like I said, you just can't assume that the same Golovkin that battered Lemieux and fought Jacobs, you got no guarantees that that's the Golovkin you're going to get this weekend. You don't know that, and that's actually very intriguing. And finally, in less interesting news, I would say, Abner Mares is still talking about
fighting Davis,
jumping off the deep end and fighting Gervonta Davis. Even now that it has been announced that Gervonta Davis has moved up to the 135-pound division, Mares still has his sights set on that guy. And, it was already a pretty, shitty situation for Mares. Mares was coming off a loss. He would be moving up from 126 up to 130, where Gervonta Davis was. Now he's at 135. And yet Mares is still looking at this guy. And you know why I don't rule out the possibility that the fight might happen? I don't rule it out because in the 135-pound division, Gervonta Davis would he'd be as much an island at 135 as he was at 130. Most of the actual world titles are already held by other guys. Vasyl Lomachenko's got 3 of them. The only other title at the weight is the IBF title, which is going to be in contention in the Caire versus Lopez fight. Caire, he's the reigning red belt champion. There are no full-fledged world titles for Gervonta Davis to fight for at 135. And it being that the PBC doesn't work with anybody, that limits his options, and it puts him in a situation where he has a self-imposed scarcity of opponents. It's for this reason I believe that, they might conjure up Abner Mares to keep him busy. They might, because they're not going to have him fight for a world title. That would require him to fight either Vasyl Lomachenko or the winner of Caire versus Lopez. 2 fights I don't think we're going to see Gervonta Davis in. I don't think you think you're going to see him in them either.
Nah.
That's one way it could happen. That's one way it could happen. Maybe Mares does go up there, he fights that guy because, PBC ain't got that many guys for him to fight. But yet another scenario, which also seems mildly plausible, is that, Gervonta Davis, he's moving up to 35. And now Leo Santa Cruz, he's moving up to 30. Leo may end up picking up the title that Gervonta Davis left behind, the WBA title, the full title. Leo may end up with that title, and guess what? Abner Mares may end up with Leo's title. Oh yeah, it can happen that way. They're playing musical chairs with WBA titles. Gervonta Davis, he left his behind for Leo, and now Leo left his behind for Abner. That's another way it could go down. That's another way it could happen. This article does mention a title run. Well, Gervonta Davis ain't in possession of no world title, so your title run, as it were, as they describe it, it wouldn't be with him. You ain't gonna win nothing from him, Go on a title run, it's gotta be for a title. And, the only title that I see is available for a PBC fighter, a PBC guy, PBC who don't want to work with anybody, the only title that I see is available for Abner. is the title that Leo just left behind, the WBA title. Other than that, what title run is he going to go on? With who?
I don't know.
Davis ain't got no title. Leo, you can't be talking about going on a title run with him. You done fought him 2 times already, and he done beat you 2 times already. So if you're going on a title run, not only does it have to be for a title, but I don't imagine it's going to be against a guy that already beat you twice. So when I hear this title run talk, what I'm thinking is musical chairs at the PBC with WBA titles. That's another possibility. So that they can expand on the number of world champions in their stable, fighting under the PBC banner. That's yet another way it could happen. And in truth, neither one of those 2 scenarios, whether Mares goes all the way up there to 35 to fight Davis, or he stays at 126 and picks up the title that Leo left behind, neither one of those 2 scenarios are intriguing scenarios, because neither of those 2 scenarios
qualify
are the best versus the best. That's not what that is. I mean, it's just not. The best versus the best would require you to fight the best guys at your weight, not have guys jumping in weight so that you can continue to keep things in-house. That's not the best versus the best.
It's just not.
This guy, he's coming off a loss and eye surgery, all right? That's why the fight with Davis fell through, because the guy had to get eye surgery. At least that's the cover story. So, as you can imagine, he's going to need some kind of a tune-up fight. And I don't think he's going to be looking to tune up at 135, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So, all things considered, this is an insight in what we could end up seeing, that if Gervonta Davis can't conjure up anybody interesting, if the well is running dry for fights for him at 135, they might just tell, Abner to do what Mikey did. Mikey jumped up 2 weight classes for Errol, and Abner may jump up 2 weight classes for Davis.